All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the North Central Drought webinar. Hold on just a couple of minutes. We're going to get started at about 1:02 and let a few more people join in before we get started. So just hang in there. I haven't, but it's great that you reminded me. So here we go. Our first speaker, and more important than anything I just said, is Molly Woslin, and she'll talk about, as you can see, recent current conditions. Take it away, Molly. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Doug. So as Doug said, I'm Molly Wolizin, and I'm a Regional Drought Information Coordinator with NIDIS, which is the National Integrated Drought Information System, and I coordinate our Midwest and Missouri River Basin regions. So I'm up first today to set the stage on what the current status of drought is across the North Central U.S. and talking through the conditions that have gotten us to this point. So hopefully this will set the stage nicely for talking about the impacts that we've been experiencing and also the potential impacts and outlooks. Okay, so first I wanted to start by showing a loop showing the progression of drought on the U.S. Drought Monitor since early May. So you'll see that the date is on the top right, starting with May 2nd, going through July 4th. So throughout this time, you can see the evolution of drought, where there's rapid intensification across the Midwest region, and the legend is on the left, but just to describe the colors a bit, the lightest yellow are noting abnormally dry conditions, which is not technically considered drought, but then as the colors get darker, that's the more severe the drought. So the highest level is exceptional drought, or D4, and that's in the dark maroon. So you can see in a way that it almost is like the drought has shifted eastward, as you do see some improvements in the Central Plains across Kansas and the western portions of the state, although we do see quite a bit of persistence and intensification of drought in this time frame in eastern Nebraska and also eastern Kansas. So this map is showing the change in the U.S. Drought Monitor categories for roughly the same time period from May 9th through July 4th. The gray areas show areas that have not changed in a category on the U.S. Drought Monitor, meaning that they've stayed the same. The greens and blues show areas that have seen improvement, and the yellow, orange, and brown colors represent areas that have seen degradation or worsening conditions. So in terms of areas that have gotten worse over the last 8 weeks, South Central Wisconsin has actually seen a 4-category change on the U.S. Drought Monitor of worsening conditions. Other areas in the Midwest that have a 3-category change of worse conditions is shown by the orange in northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and also portions of Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, and Missouri. On the other hand, you will see that there have been areas with improvements over the last 8 weeks. There is improvement in western Kansas and Nebraska by 4 categories on the Drought Monitor, and also a small portion of eastern Wyoming. These places in the Central Plains have been in drought for quite a while, so this was quite a welcome change with improving drought conditions in these areas. So I'm going to walk us through what drove the changes that we saw on the previous 2 slides. We'll start by looking at the actual accumulated precipitation in inches that we've received over the last 60 days from May 7th through July 5th. So typically when we're thinking about the year with rainfall, in May and June, there's a lot of places across the North Central U.S. that would expect to have some of their rainiest months. But unfortunately for many places, that just didn't happen this year. Total precipitation is shown here again, and in the light to dark orange in the Midwest, there's just 1 to 4 inches that fell across portions of the upper Midwest. On the other hand, there are portions of the plains that had several inches. The dark greens to purples show anywhere from 8 to 14 inches of rainfall. Another area that stands out is western Colorado, with areas only receiving about up to 2 inches. But you'll see, though, as I change the slides and looking at the departure from normal, this actually really isn't too far below normal for this part of the country. But if we do look back at the Midwest, again, this is showing the departure from normal precipitation in inches. So the darkest orange colors are showing areas that are 6 to 9 inches below normal for this 8-week time frame. And the lighter orange color is showing areas that are at 3 to 6 inches below normal. And you can see that across the Midwest, that is pretty much the entire region. In the central to high plains, the rainfall over the last 60 days has been near to above normal, shown by the greens to purple colors. And this is coming off of a wet and snowy winter as well. So we've definitely seen some significant drought improvements across the central and high plains, Missouri River Basin area over the last few months. So now let's take a look at the temperature during the same time frame. Again, this is the last 60 days starting May 7th. So one positive of this summer so far is that for many places, temperatures have been fairly seasonal. The yellow to light green shows temperatures that are within 2 degrees of normal. And you can see that's a large part of the region, especially the southern portions, which is where there has not been a lot of rainfall. If you go further north to the upper Midwest and also the Dakotas, into eastern Montana, they have been unseasonably warm for the summer. However, some of these areas have also been seeing near to above normal rainfall as well. So if we break down the temperature a bit more, this is looking at the departure from the normal maximum temperature, so our daytime highs typically. And you'll see that the daytime highs have been slightly above normal. It is more above normal compared to the normal temperature. So this means that our daytime highs have been higher than normal, which has contributed to increased moisture loss from the surface through increased evapotranspiration. So even though the lack of precipitation has really been driving the drought progression that we've seen, having higher daytime temperatures has also helped intensify conditions quickly across the Midwest. And so this is another temperature map looking at the normal departure from normal minimum temperature. And it shows that we have been fairly normal in terms of our overnight lows, shown by the yellow and green across much of the region. Especially the further east you get, we're even below normal. So this is a good thing in terms of overnight relief from the heat for humans and agriculture, in terms of giving everyone a rest from the hot summer days. So thankfully, over the last couple of weeks, there has been a bit of a shift in the pattern where we have seen more rainfall and thunderstorm development across the region. And this has been a really welcome shift for many. So now we're looking at the most recent 7 days of precipitation, and this map is showing the percent of normal from June 29th to July 5th. So the orange and reds show areas with below normal precipitation, and the blues to purple show areas with significantly above normal precipitation. So it's pretty obvious looking at this map that the last 7 days, there's been a large swath of the region across the central U.S. that has received above normal precipitation, on the order of 200 to 400% of normal. Much of this came during just a couple of severe weather events, a fairly significant derecho that happened on June 29th. There will be more information about the severe weather and its impacts on the regular monthly webinar on July 20th. So one thing that is important to remember when we're looking at this map is that these maps are gridded, and so it is smoothed overall. So while it looks like there's an entire swath that received that much precipitation, it is fairly likely that not every single area got that much precipitation, since summer precip tends to be more localized with thunderstorm activity. But nonetheless, there are a lot of areas that got some precipitation relief over the last 7 days. You will see, though, that areas were missed, including a large portion of Wisconsin, western Colorado, and portions of the Upper Plains and Midwest, where precipitation was just 2 to 25% of normal. So looking at the change map for the U.S. Drought Monitor over the last week, you can see how the rain did or did not help improve drought conditions. Again, the gray areas show where there's no change in drought, which is a large part of the region. We do see some improvement in the green colors across Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, and Ohio. And for the areas that were not so lucky with the rainfall, like Wisconsin, southern Missouri, eastern Kansas, and Minnesota, there was a 1 category degradation or worsening of conditions on the drought monitor. So finally, that brings us to our most recent U.S. Drought Monitor map, which was just released this morning. 43% of the North Central U.S. is in some level of drought, from moderate drought D1 to exceptional drought D4. The exceptional drought is in eastern Nebraska and in portions of Kansas. We see the extreme drought, or D3, in the red colors across portions of eastern Nebraska, Kansas, Missouri, southern Iowa, and south central Wisconsin. So if we look at the statistics for just the Midwest region, which are the 9 states in the box, 64% of the Midwest is in drought, with an additional 24% of the region abnormally dry. So it's just those small pockets of where you just see white on the map in Ohio, Kentucky, where there is no drought or abnormally dry conditions right now. So the last thing I wanted to show before turning it over to Dennis is soil moisture. This slide is showing 2 different soil moisture products. The one on the left is the NASA GRACE root zone soil moisture percentiles. The yellow to red show below normal soil moisture, and the blues show above normal. The one on the right is the NOAA Climate Prediction Center leaky bucket model, and that shows the daily percentiles as well. But this one's showing a little bit deeper at 1.6 meters for soil moisture, whereas the one on the left is the top 1 meter. So for the CPC soil moisture, again, yellow to red represents below normal and greens are above. So while no soil moisture product is perfect, these 2 products do show that generally soil moisture is estimated to be below normal across Missouri, Illinois, Iowa, eastern Nebraska, and Kansas. On the other hand, you see that central to high plains area further west is above normal at the moment. So with that, I am going to turn it now over to Dennis Toddy, who will talk more about the impacts that we're seeing from the drought, particularly with agriculture.
Thanks, Molly. We're going to talk about agriculture and a few other kinds of things before we hand it off to Ann to talk about the overall water issues specifically. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We're going to draw heavily from several graphics. Molly, go ahead and go to the next slide. We're going to draw heavily from some graphics, and I'll show you the link here in just the next one on the next slide, from data from USDA NASS, National Agricultural Statistics Service, for those not well steeped in agriculture, where we have weekly data, weekly survey data from reporters across the country. We'll hit on some of those, and then we'll hit a satellite product near the end. The rainfalls and thanks, Molly, for setting the stage here very well. The recent rainfalls that have occurred finally have cut into the weekly reports on the amount of soil moisture that is considered short to very short. These weekly reports fall into a 5-point scale. So the short to very short is the top number, what percentage of the state ag land in each of these states is considered short to very short, and then the bottom number is the change over the last week. Nationally, it went down by 4%, but you can see several states across the Midwest where, Michigan dropped by 40 percentage points, Illinois dropped by 57%, Indiana dropped by 30%. So the rains did cut into some of those concerns about soil moisture. Now, Molly showed a couple of those soil moisture products. We have improved the situation, but we have not fixed the situation overall because we still have some overall very dry soils going on right now. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. We're going to continue now looking at some of the different crops and some of the impacts to some of the different crops. And the graphic or the link down at the below now is from the National Drought Mitigation Center, where if you have attended these before, you've seen these graphics before. They're created by, the data comes from USDA NAS. The USDA Office of the Chief Economist has been creating these for a number of years and shared them privately, but they are available on a weekly basis now at that website, the National Drought Mitigation Center. So our situation on the corn side, same kind of thing here. On the upper left-hand side, the percent of each state's corn conditions is considered good to excellent. You'll see numbers that are in the lower 30s there in a number of places. That's pretty low for this time of year. Despite the recent rainfalls, we have not improved our corn condition scores that much. So we do have corn that is going into that tasseling phase, that reproductive phase, which is where we can do the most damage to the way of yield. So while the rains did help the situation, we still have a lot of crop that is fairly well stressed going on right now. On the lower right-hand side, we see the reports from USDA NAS on percent silking, or the percent tasseling that has occurred in each one of the states. We're at about 8% nationally, which is slightly ahead of average. But then you see the southern states are a bit further ahead than the northern states are, which is not unexpected. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide, where we'll look at soybeans. And you're going to see some very similar numbers, with conditions from Michigan down to Illinois and Missouri being the worst, Wisconsin also. Most of the row crop area is focused in the southern part of the state there, whereas the eastern part of the Midwest has improved, and Minnesota has not been too bad either overall from a soybean standpoint. Lower right-hand side, the amount that's poor to very poor. We don't have a status of where we are in soybeans. Soybeans haven't reached a critical point yet where they can start to lose more yield. That will occur in a few weeks as we get closer to August, where we have potential for bigger losses there. Let's jump ahead and we'll look at, I believe winter wheat is next. Now winter wheat again is seeded in the fall, starts regrowing in the spring. So we've reached that time of nearly harvest. So most of whatever is going to happen with that crop has been done already. So the amount of poor to very poor, up in the upper left-hand side, overall winter wheat conditions in the eastern part of the Midwest, I believe that soft red winter wheat that is grown over there, except for Michigan, are generally in pretty good shape over there, whereas the plain states, you see larger numbers. Hard red winter wheat that was beat, had planted in very dry conditions last year, drought carried into the spring, and then had some cold temperatures and damage during the winter time. So it's that's why those conditions are showing up pretty well. On the lower right-hand side, the areas in green, we've made quite a bit of progress on the way of winter wheat harvesting, whereas the states that are in brown, we're just starting or have not quite started yet in the way of winter wheat progress. Let's go ahead and go on to the next one. And pasture and range conditions, probably should have put this one up front, because this was one of the first places where we saw problems with agricultural issues. Again, this is the pasture and range conditions, percent of those pasture and range in each state that's considered good to excellent. And that area, again, from Michigan, Illinois, down to Missouri, you see Missouri is only 2% rated good to excellent. So there's going to be a lot that's in the poor to very poor range. Grass rangeland conditions were one of the first places showing stress, because they can be stressed earlier in the season. So we're seeing poor productivity from those grasses and rangelands. When places were cut for hay, the dry conditions were beneficial and we were able to get it dried down, but a lot of the productivity issues were showing up in a number of those states. But you see states like Ohio and some of the states in the plains, especially further out in the plains, we've started to recover some of the rangeland conditions going on. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to give you a little bit more detail, each of those are statewide numbers, so it managed to give you a state-by-state basis. We pulled this graphic from drought.gov. It's a NOAA product that looks at, uses satellite images to look at vegetation health, or where things are considered stressed. So anything that is in red or to pink shows up on the see on the graphic there is in the unfavorable conditions. So you see lots of that area, again, Missouri, Illinois, Wisconsin, parts of Michigan, and parts of Indiana and Ohio that are stressed. Even though with the recent rainfalls, we have not had, we've not been able to improve the situation with the limited rainfall. And the cooler temperatures that we've had here recently have also been beneficial as we've reduced some of that potential stress on those crops around the region. But even with the recent rainfalls, we still have a fair amount of stress out there. You notice out in the plains areas and a few pockets as we get over in the Midwest, the colors are in the greens to the blues. Those are favorable where there's much less stress, where there's been more rainfall recently. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And this one's going to be really busy, but to kind of give you a little bit of overview of some of the situations. Again, reminder that the rains have helped immensely in the way of a corn crop because they've cut that high level of stress off. We're not out of the woods. We're going to need more rainfall, and we don't want too high of temperatures. And from what Doug's going to talk about in the outlooks, it looks somewhat beneficial as we're looking ahead here that we're not going to have hot and not too dry conditions going on. Unfortunately, rainfalls have been spotty and will continue to be spotty. Places are going to receive rainfalls. Other places are going to miss out, unfortunately. I mentioned the grass conditions and the lack of forage. Just another term for some kind of grasses to feed livestock. There have been cattle sell-offs noted, particularly in Missouri, because of people not having a forage available and not being able to afford to purchase or find or to be able to afford purchasing additional forage for livestock. So people have instead chose to sell off herds in those cases. We've widespread reports of specialty crop issues, especially unirrigated specialty crops, where there was reduced or no yield or had planting problems establishing going on in the springtime. Showed up in other places with pick your own strawberries. Other farmers marketplaces, people have been delayed or not having available just because of a lack of plants that have been able to get established and start developing product. Christmas tree plantings, noted one place, and I believe in Wisconsin, that said 30% of their plantings this spring did not make it because of the very dry conditions. Probably a lack of irrigation or an inability to irrigate in some of these places really did damage. So that's not as much of a problem this year, but several years down the road when these trees would mature, we'll see that problem. Also on a wider spread issue that are beyond the ag area, lots of landscape vegetation issues, even reasonably established trees. People have been noting there have been various horticultural groups have been encouraging people to water because of stress on trees, because of the severeness of the dryness. Molly didn't dive at this, but in some of the places around the region, we have dryness going back to last year or multiple years. So we have some very, very dry soils deeper in the profile. We have had some watering supply problems, not watering, urban water use, parts of Illinois, Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska, where cities have begun voluntary watering restrictions or enacted some watering restrictions because of a lack of water available. And there have been a number of burn bans related to just overall fires or fireworks coming around to the 4th of July holiday because of concerns with the dry vegetation, trying to head off any kind of wildfire issues. A number of the places in the upper Midwest typically are not this dry at this time of year, so there's usually less concern. We've had to move into various issues this year related to that. I believe that is the last of my slides, so we'll pass it on to Ann to talk more about the water issues.
All right, thank you, Dennis, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Anna Wolverton, and I'm the meteorologist for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in their Mississippi Valley Division, which covers these 6 districts here all along the Mississippi River. And I also hold the title of liaison to the National Weather Service. So I actually serve both agencies. So if you move to the next slide. I serve the division in the 6 districts which run along the main stem Mississippi River, but I have a genuine interest and concern for the whole Mississippi River Basin because all of the rain or snow, which falls, basically anywhere between the Rockies in the west and the Smokies in the east, any of that precipitation, it runs off into the main stem Mississippi River. And this graphic here illustrates that. And it shows the 5 main subbasins within it. So there's the Missouri Basin, the Upper Mississippi Basin, the Ohio Basin, the Arkansas Basin, and then the Red Basin. And then there's the Lower Mississippi Basin in the yellow there, which is where all of those basins converge. So the Lower Miss is considered everything south of Cairo, Illinois. But during normal times, with normal river conditions, these percentages on here indicate, on average, how much of the water in the Lower Mississippi Basin comes from these other basins. So you can see that the Lower Miss really relies heavily on the water out of the Ohio Basin, with that 60% coming from there. So when that basin in particular is suffering from drought, like now, then problems tend to crop up on the main stem Lower Miss, like now and like they did last fall as well. So let's move on to the next map, which shows the stream flow. This is a map showing the average stream flow throughout the last month of June. And here we can see there has been much below normal stream flows with those orange colors and darker maroon colors spreading from central Kansas up to Indiana, into Michigan, and even up into parts of Minnesota and Wisconsin. And within that band of much below normal flows in the Midwest, there are even some near record low flows indicated by those red dots in that area as well. So these low stream flows on the local rivers and tributaries are now really impacting the flow that leads into the Mississippi River. So in the next slide, we can take a look at some of the current river stages and forecasts for some of the upper Mississippi River points. So on the left, we have St. Paul, Minnesota, and on the right, we have Rock Island or Davenport, Iowa. Now, these stages are actually right around normal for this time of year. So it's not really until you get down to Missouri and to St. Louis where the river really starts to get low, because you see the river above St. Louis features numerous lock and dams, which serve to keep the river at a manageable and navigable depth to aid those interests who are shipping up and down the river. So, but once you get to St. Louis, that's where the Missouri River comes into the Mississippi, and the river really begins to change from there south, since there's no more lock and dam south of there. And near St. Louis and southward, that's really where we're seeing the low water issues. So on the next slide, we can take a look. Let me explain this slide here. So this graph shows the daily river stages for the Mississippi River at St. Louis. So the pink line is showing the stages for this year, for the year 2023. And the green line is showing stages for the record drought year of 1988. At least it was record for at least this time of year. Then the big blue band shows the maximum and minimum river stages for the period of record, which dates back to 1861, at least for this river point. So the top blue line shows all of the daily max stages, which have occurred for each day throughout the year. And then the bottom blue line shows the daily record minimum stages. And then that yellowish, brownish band in the middle shows the monthly average stages. So right now, the river is nearly 10 feet below normal stages for this time of year. And actually just last week, it hit a couple of daily low stage records, beating out the previous record low water year of 1988. And you can see how that pink line briefly dipped below everything there in the red circle there. Thankfully, this river point had seen a bump due to the rainfall over the last week or two, but that's just likely a momentary relief, because as you can see by looking at the yellow band, we actually haven't even reached the climatological low flow season yet. That doesn't usually start until the fall in like October, November, and even December. So the fact that we are seeing these low flows now is kind of concerning. And looking at the year of 1988, the low flow started early too, and they hung around through really the end of the year. So hopefully we'll see a pattern switch at some point, and hopefully we won't have to worry about this for the next 6 months, but definitely something to keep an eye on. So let's move south a little bit. Here's the same graph for a point a little bit down the river, and this is actually for the Ohio River at Cairo, Illinois, but this is where the Ohio River meets the Mississippi River. And that map in the right-hand corner, it's kind of hard to see, but you can see the Mississippi River coming down from St. Louis. There you see it flowing through Cape Girardeau, and then the Ohio River comes in from the east, and it passes through Paducah, and at that little green point south of Cape Girardeau and just west of Paducah, that's Cairo, Illinois. That's where where the two rivers meet. And again, this is a key point in the river, since this is where 60% more water moves into the Mississippi, and the river it becomes a completely different beast from there southward. So again, looking at the graph, here we can see the river has been extremely low for this time of year. And thankfully we're seeing a bump here too, thanks to the rainfall over the past week or two. The expectation though is that while there was a good bit of runoff from these storms the past week, once that water moves through the system, we'll be right back to where we were before, with the low flows again, expected by the middle of July or so. And in the next slide, we can see the forecasts for Cairo and for St. Louis. So St. Louis there on the left, and Cairo on the right. And you can see the bumps, which have just happened, but the 14-day forecast shows big falls are expected to happen again, with St. Louis falling below 0 feet by the middle of the month, and then Cairo will be falling to near 10 feet or so by the 3rd week of July. And 0 feet at St. Louis and 10 feet at Cairo are both the points where issues start occurring on the river. So yeah, what exactly are those issues then? If you move to the next slide, when the river gets so low, the navigation channel will get restricted, and there's more difficulty for tows and barges who are trying to navigate the river, because there are sandbars which show up and groundings become more of a threat. So when the river gets so low, there's extra dredging which needs to be done in order to maintain the federally mandated 9-foot navigation channel on the Mississippi River. And the Corps of Engineers they're working on this. They have numerous dredge boats, at least 12 right now, that are out on the main stem river working. They're prioritizing the trouble spots and, of course, addressing those first. When the river gets so low, the barges and tows, they have to start restricting how much load they're carrying so that they don't sit so low in the water, so that they don't end up grounded and running into sandbars. So barge companies are now mandating reductions on loads. They're implementing draft restrictions, and overall they're reducing tow sizes. So right now there's about a 10 to 20% reduction in tow capacity for barges along the river. And when barges can't ship as much, then industry has to rely on trucking or rail cars to move that product, which overall is less efficient. This graphic here on the right, it shows how much one typical 15 barge tow can ship versus what its equivalent would take in rail or trucking. So approximately 216 rail cars with 6 locomotives would equal 115 barge tow, or 1,050 semi-trucks. So this was a big issue last fall when the farmers' harvests were complete and there was too much of a backup on the restricted river to ship via barge, so they had to find other ways to ship, which everyone was doing too, and there's only so many trucks and trains available to accommodate it all. So again, that's one thing we'll be keeping an eye on as we move into late summer and fall. Yes, so one other big impact is down near the mouth of the river. Now, I know this probably doesn't impact those of you in the Midwest or Northern Plains, but it's an interesting impact. So I'll just briefly tell you about it. So when the flows on the Mississippi drop below a certain level at the mouth of the river, the salt water from the Gulf of Mexico begins to creep into the river. So this intrusion of salt water into the river it's a naturally occurring thing. It happens periodically, and it happens because the bottom of the riverbed from the Gulf of Mexico up to about Natchez, Mississippi, is actually below sea level. So salt water moves upriver along the riverbed beneath the less dense fresh water flowing downstream. So again, the more dense salt water begins to move upstream while the less dense fresh water flows downstream over top of it. And under normal conditions, the downstream freshwater flow on the river prevents the upriver progression of that salt water because it's pushing downstream so fast. However, in times of extreme low flow, like now, the salt water can travel unimpeded upriver, and it will threaten municipalities and industries which pull drinking water or industrial water supplies from the river. So to prevent this from happening, the Corps of Engineers will build an underwater sill on the riverbed made of dredged sediment and this sill will prevent the saltwater wedge from moving upstream. And the Corps is actually in the process of contracting this out right now and getting it built for what is the second year in a row. And this will only be the 5th time this sill has been built. Previous years include all the expected suspects, so 1988, 1999, 2012, and it was built last year as well. So when the river flows go back up, when they increase again, this sediment sill will then get washed away as the higher flows. They wash the salt water and the sediment back downstream and out into the Gulf. So that's just an interesting tidbit, how the drought here in the Midwest and the Northern Plains is leading to low flows on the Mississippi, which in turn is impacting cities and industries far downstream in Southeast Louisiana, all the way to the mouth of the river. So with that, I'll end. There's my contact info if you want to reach out to me with any questions or anything, and I'll hand it back to Doug now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And a great conversation there. It's something we usually don't include enough of. Of course, the Mississippi doesn't get that low that often. So really interesting stuff. And thanks to Dennis and Molly too for their information. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the outlook, and then we'll get to some questions. A good question was just asked. And Anna, I don't know if you can see it, but I sent it to you. We'll see if you can at least read it. You don't have to answer it right now. Excuse me. All right, let's go, Molly. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the outlooks over the next season, we'll say, next 3 months, really. This is only looking at the next 7 days. And this is what models are saying in terms of total amount of, we'll call it rainfall. We're not even going to call it precipitation because, it's the middle of summer. It's going to be rain. So this is a total amount of rainfall that is possible, not necessarily going to happen, but possible over the next 7 days, according to the weather models, if you will. You'll see incredible amount of water across southern Kansas, basically from Colorado across southern Kansas into southern Missouri and places like that, all the way over into the Ohio Valley. lesser, a little bit lesser amounts, but that's substantial rain in 7 days. We're talking over 2 inches, and in some places up to over 5 inches if it comes to realization. North of there, you can see it sort of, if you will, degrades a little bit, and less substantial moisture. Looks like Nebraska, where there's some pretty bad drought, and even portions of southern South Dakota, maybe western Iowa, and then so sort of general, what I would call normal rainfall across most of Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. Excuse me. North of there, it looks even worse, though. We're talking maybe 1/4 to 1/2 an inch over a lot of area, or less. So cross your fingers up there, and we hope some of this rain does fall. Of course, we don't want 7 inches on anybody's backyard overnight or something like that, but the potential is there. And this could be a couple different weather systems moving through that causes all this rain. Next slide. So looking beyond the next 7 days to the 7 days beyond that, so we'll call it week 2. We also call this the 8 to 14 day outlook. Temperature on the left, precipitation on the right. These are probabilities, and on the left you see probabilities of above normal temperatures, really anchored in the southern part of the U.S., in the Southwest, to be honest, and then lesser probabilities of above normal as you head north. Even a slight probability of below normal across the Dakotas, really, but near normal for the most part. Week 2, and we're talking July 13th and 19th, stretching from Montana, Wyoming, all the way to Ohio. So that's pretty good, especially for this time of year. This is about the hottest time of year climatologically speaking. We're talking about the 2nd, 3rd, maybe 4th week of July across the nation for most places. Then on the right, you see the probability of precipitation being above or below normal. You see a big below over the Intermountain region, but some of that extends, and these are slight probabilities. In other words, they're just barely, if you will, hedging towards being below normal out over across Wyoming and Colorado. Then we get back to near normal is the gray. And then the light green color is the probability of above normal. Now, I guess it's good that we see some green as opposed to brown in terms of probabilities, but these are not very high probabilities, okay? I guess it's good that we have a little bit higher probabilities across the Ohio Valley where the rainfall is needed. So next slide. So this is sort of, this is July, and this is an outlook that is sort of, we're well into July. We're already in the 6th day of July. So some of this may have already come true in terms of those below normal temperatures. For example, on the left-hand image there over Wyoming, more or less, and equal chances of below, near normal, or above, all the way extending to basically Ohio and then back to Colorado again, that big sort of bite, if you will, out of the Midwest, with slight probabilities of above normal, sort of bordering that from North Dakota all the way to the Great Lakes and then back around. And the above normal, where we've been hearing about it quite a bit over Texas. And then the outlook for precipitation shows sort of corresponds to what we just looked at in terms of the 7-day outlook in terms of precipitation, with that above normal over northern Missouri and above normal wherever it's green, but the highest probability over northern Missouri, and then lesser probabilities of above normal. But that's really kind of right. We'll just call it the Corn Belt for the most part. Shows the probability of above normal precipitation for that area, which would be very helpful. But not everybody is going to get it, as this is summertime precipitation, so it's convective, meaning sort of hit and miss, and you got to cross your fingers a lot. Next slide. July through September, the general outlook for those 3 months, all put together and then averaged out, is for equal chances for the northern plains into the northwest, or northern plains area. Equal chances meaning is an equal chance of below, near normal, or above in terms of temperature on the left. Otherwise, temperatures are forecasted to be above normal. But again, the probabilities above normal, let's say across Iowa all the way to Ohio, aren't super strong, but they are definitely leaning in that direction of being above normal for those 3 months. Again, when you average it all out for the whole period. The precipitation map on the right shows a definite bullseye, again, low probabilities, but above normal across the Central Plains. And that extends the slider, less probability extends back over to Montana and then down south into Texas. So the good thing is we're not seeing a strong probability of below normal anywhere. You see a little bit in the Great Lakes and certainly in the Four Corners, but really we're not predicting that there's going to be a major continuation of drought in this region, which is good. Next slide. So here are the drought outlooks. The one on the left, the image on the left is for just the month of July. The image on the right is for, again, that July through September period. There's not a lot of differences between the two, but I'll point out that wherever you see brown, that's where drought is not supposed to improve too much. Wherever you see yellow, however, that is where drought is supposed to get worse. Okay, so we're thinking that in our world, in our sort of north central part of the U.S., places like Wisconsin, Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and portions of Minnesota are going to stay or get worse in terms of drought. And then where you see that green to gray color is where conditions should improve, according to the outlook. So by the end of September, this is what it's saying. By the end of September, we should see categorical improvements in those gray areas, and then drought sort of go away in the green areas. That's what the outlook says. Okay, next slide. One thing you may have heard already is that El Nino is rearing its head, and there is an advisory out for that, meaning that the Climate Prediction Center does believe that El Nino will happen, and it looks like it will happen with a vengeance in terms of being moderate to strong. But aside from that, just looking at July, again, we're keeping this near term because we're going to keep doing these webinars into the future, and we'll get updates on all this stuff. So, but for now, I'm just looking at short term, meaning July, August, September. We could look much further into the future, but not this time. So July, August, September, on the left are the probabilities of seeing either a warm or cold extreme. Now, cold in July is relative, right? It's not like it's going to freeze. But what we are seeing, just generally speaking, is almost the entire Midwest and certainly the plain state, northern plain states, showing a propensity to be cooler than normal. That's a good thing, mostly. On the right, you see the probability of extreme precipitation sort of increased where we just saw the potential for precipitation over the next 3 months as well, in some of that portion, as well as in the short term as well. So if El Nino, and El Nino doesn't tell the whole story, but if El Nino kind of gets its act together and we start being influenced by it, or the atmosphere is more influenced by it, we are more likely to see this sort of pattern of sort of wet conditions across the central U.S., maybe even the north central U.S., and then cooler conditions as well. We'll see if it happens. This is not a forecast. This is just what has happened in the past. Okay, this is just an analysis of what has happened during El Ninos in the past during these 3 months. What do I got next? Next slide. All right, so overall, near to slightly below normal temperatures, northern U.S. in the short term, above normal, sort of Kentucky west to Colorado, Wyoming, slight above normal rainfall chances. Again, in the Midwest, I think it was especially of the Ohio Valley, and slightly below portions below portions of Montana and Colorado in terms of rainfall. Longer term, sort of that seasonal aspect, equal chances of near, above, or below normal temperatures across the Missouri Basin, slightly elevated chances of temperatures across the Great Lakes and Midwest and Rockies. That's not me moving my mouse, that's Molly. Slight tilt towards wetter conditions, Great Plains, Texas to Montana, and then a increasing potential for El Nino. This is the key. This may be the key to everything. Increasing potential for El Nino to begin to start influencing our climate as we move into late summer and fall, and definitely this winter. Well, I say definitely, but that's not true. More likely this summer or this winter. And I think that's all I have in terms of the outlook. Here's a bunch of information. Yes, this will be recorded. Somebody asked that question. Yes, it will be available at that website right there. So write that down. And then I also want to update people, let them know that, excuse me, on July 20th, like we always do, and I mentioned this at the top, every third Thursday, we have a webinar and a presenter, usually it's a state climatologist, but not always, a state climatologist from our region, talk about what's similar to what we just did, a climate summary, impacts, and outlook. So Trent Ford, Dr. Trent Ford, Illinois State Climatologist, will be our next one on July 20th at 1 p.m. Central Time. You can register at that site. You can email me. You can actually email any of us if you don't have time to write all that gibberish down. We do want to thank all these different groups that gave us information that we put on our webinar. And we want to go to the next slide. And there's our contact information in case you needed it. Yeah. What am I missing? Anything? Anybody?
Yeah, Molly, I don't know if you can go back to the Drought Outlook page. Doug kind of tried to wander around talking about it. There's two main takeaways from these Drought Outlook maps. How these are gauged are what is the drought status at the end of that time period compared to the beginning. Doesn't matter what happens in between. It's just a matter of it's judging the end versus the beginning. So the places for improvement are saying that there's a best likelihood of categories being at least one category better or eliminated, or in the case of the yellow, drought is likely going to occur in that place where it does not exist right now. That's the main takeaway from these.
Right. A couple other things. This drought that we're in, if you will, for most places, didn't just start this summer. There have been fits and starts to drought and long-term drought over different parts of the North Central U.S. for the last 3 years, as a matter of fact, maybe 3.5 years. Anyway, it wasn't overly surprising to some of us when it got dry, especially in May and June, when it was supposed to be very wet. That's normal. That's climatologic our wettest time of year for most of us. But when you miss precipitation during those 2 months, you know there's going to be trouble, right? And I think it's an accumulation of events that is leading to what we're seeing on the Mississippi, for example. That's a longer term sort of memory in the system issue. The other thing I wanted to say was, yeah, actually, that's all I really wanted to say. Now, anything anybody wants to add on that statement? Because we have one question, and it's basically, is there a significant flow from Lake Michigan and the Illinois River into the Mississippi? Are the river barges that need a certain minimum depth in the Illinois River? Okay. And Anna was kind to begin answering that question. And Lake Michigan water stays within the Great Lakes watershed. That's actually a very touchy issue. It doesn't tend to flow into the Illinois River. But Dennis, do you want to expand on that? Or Anna?
Why would I want to expand?
I heard you sigh. I heard you sighing like, oh God, Doug, you said the wrong thing. But no, do you have anything you want to say in addition to what you said already, Anna?
No, like you said, it tends to stay within, the Great Lakes. There's a canal that connects the Lake Michigan to the Illinois River. But generally, the Illinois River does flow into the Mississippi. And the Illinois River does contribute a good portion of the upper Miss river flows. So there's about 5% of the flows come from the Illinois River. And they asked about the barge or the minimum depth needed for navigation. And yes, that is the same for the Illinois River as it is for the Mississippi River. So there's a 9-foot navigation channel that has to be maintained on both of those rivers. And the Corps of Engineers is responsible for all the dredging that is needed to maintain that depth.
All right. Thank you. Here's a little bit tougher question, so we'll give this to Molly. Drought of 2012 in Illinois was a ramp up from the previous years. Do you feel this could be a wind up to similar results in 2024?
Are you really giving that one to me? No. That is a tough question. I guess I would say, I guess I'm hopeful that maybe we will see this pattern shift where there will be some more precipitation, but that was more in the short term. So I guess the best way to answer this might be, if we, in the long term, 2-3 months from now, go back to a dry pattern, I think that would be concerning. So, but as of right now, I guess I'm hopeful that maybe we will continue to get some wetter conditions, but again, that won't be for everywhere. So anyone else want to take a stab at that or contradict what I said?
No, I'll just add to it that El Nino would say El Nino would by itself would say it's not likely.
Yeah.
It's not likely that we'll get worse in 2024, but it's a long time. That's a long ways away, and lots of things can happen, as you well know. And sometimes,
I see. I think the thing we have to remind people too is that we have these transition seasons, spring and fall, between spring and summer, when there are a lot of different things happen in the way of patterns in the atmosphere. So for drought to continue from one year to the next is not that common in the upper Midwest because there are so many things that transition between those two, from a winter or from a spring into the winter, summer into winter, and then back the following year. So there are some times that we do have carryover issues from one season to the next, but there are a lot of things that happen in between these two.
Just to counteract my best friend Dennis just a little bit, is that we saw the wettest conditions of all time in Wisconsin through I think March or April, depending upon where you're measuring it. But now they're in drought, so it can happen. They were not in long-term drought. I mean, obviously they weren't because they had record wetness. But they certainly got into it pretty quickly. And that's something else we should probably mention is any summer, maybe every summer, we do see drought somewhere. It's not always as widespread and it's not always as severe. But unless it's to be honest, unless it's 2019, which is an incredible year, wet year, we almost always see some sort of drought in the Midwest and definitely in the Great Plains.
And I wanted really quickly to go back to a comment just on the barge transportation. Someone did comment that the barge transportation on the Illinois has had minimal impact thanks to the locks and dams. And also 3 locks are closed until September for maintenance. So the industry had planned for that. So I just wanted to
good for you. Yep.
Follow up with that one, but go ahead for other questions.
Well, it kind of leads into what I think we've already been saying. And Molly, you may want to talk, or Dennis, either one of you, that drought has been in place for years in some places, but it seems like drier conditions are creeping a bit further east this summer. No doubt, like into Missouri and Illinois. Do we want to say any more about that other than yes, it's true?
Yeah, I guess one thing, it's not a widespread statement, but there are definitely places in the Midwest, in Missouri, in Illinois, in Iowa, that have kind of had these going back and forth where they have been dry in times, over the previous couple of years. And so I think in a way that's kind of been an underlying dryness that really made these places dry even quicker this summer. So I do think that there are some places that was the case. But you wouldn't necessarily say that they've been in drought that whole time. But I think it just played into the fact that things did accelerate quickly.
One thing we don't measure extremely well is soil moisture across this basin. Okay, so we're basing a lot of what we know on how much rain fell as opposed to what's really in the soil. It takes years, the top part of the soil profile, if you will, can dry out relatively quickly, especially when plants are growing. But that deep moisture does take time, and that's what we call memory in the system. I think Anna would probably agree that over the last 3 years, we've seen a sort of a deficit in that soil moisture, generally speaking, in terms of contribution. But, that's sort of speaking without having a lot of data on that. So I don't want to go too far down that road. We get thanks for talking about impacts to the barge industry due to the low rivers. What point could we see impacts to river tourism? Boy, I don't know. Anna, do you know anything about river tourism? I guess that would be pleasure boats and Viking tours and things.
Yeah, I don't know much about that. I'm sure they will have to, I don't know, maybe restrict some of their load as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it works, but
Well, last fall they did limit, and they had to detour, so to speak, some of the river tours and stop them because the flows were low enough in the lower Mississippi, I think in that September, October time period.
Yep.
Yeah, that's right. And then, when they go into dock, some of their docks may be affected, and they may not be able to get to the dock. So I'm sure they'll experience some impacts there. They'll have to kind of figure out where to unload their guests and everything. Might have to make some might have to improvise somehow or other.
All right. Thank you. In places like Illinois, et cetera, how much does surface drought affect irrigation water supply, groundwater, and reservoirs? Dennis, do you know anything about irrigation and water supply or Molly?
I guess just to try to play around with that a little bit, this ties back into what you were mentioning earlier about some of the longer term drought issues and having groundwater, more limited groundwater, where there's less groundwater available because of the long-term dryness, and therefore irrigation might be limited. Now, we have to remember that there are places where there's a lot of irrigation, and in the eastern part of the Midwest, there are pockets of it, but it's not as widespread as, say, when you get out to Nebraska or the Plains area. So it's a kind of a whole different situation. There's a different regulatory situation too, based on each state. So, these water supply issues are something that the local places are going to have to watch, especially ones where there are some localities where they show up earlier than some other locations. And those areas that are irrigated, we'll have to see how things play out.
Yeah, what we really don't want to happen is another heat dome to form over the top of us. That would be bad timing right now. And there's nothing in the forecast that looks like that's going to happen, by Another question about wildfires, smoke affecting the Midwest. Right now, we're getting a lot of, we'll call it zonal or quasi-zonal flow, which is more or less keeping some of that smoke to the north. I don't think the fires are out by any means. All we need is northerly flow, northeast, northwest, flow over an extended, a few days for that smoke to come back. So that's about the best we can say on that. I don't know what the prediction is long term. Anybody? Okay. Dennis, this one, I'm not sure who this is for, but anyway, would irrigation make sense then for Illinois, since these droughts seem to come right when the corn and soybeans are in critical stage? Is there enough groundwater for massive irrigation in central Illinois? And then she mentioned a particular mammoth aquifer seems adequate at this time.
Okay, a couple things with irrigation. Unlike the plains, the Midwest tends to usually have enough water on a regular basis. You wouldn't necessarily need widespread, frequent irrigation in the current climate. Future climate may be a whole different situation, where you could tap into water, and then you might just need a couple inches of irrigation to get a crop through that very stressful period and still be okay. So that's only part of the equation, though. There is a fairly significant upfront cost in irrigation, and then there's a cost of running the irrigation in the way of pumps, electricity, diesel, whatever there is. And what oftentimes we find out is that, there is water available for irrigation. You could do it, but the cost effectiveness of developing the structure and maintaining it and putting it in doesn't pay for itself, at least in a current setting. So that's part of this decision with irrigation. There was a bit of a big run up following 2012, where people were very interested in establishing more irrigation, and there was a bit more that was added around the Midwest. But we've had some relatively wet years, so there was not the big run up and development of more irrigation that was maybe expected.
I'm going to keep going here because we got two more questions, and then we're going to have to cut this off. But one of them is kind of a tricky one, so I'll start it. Is the current multi-year drought in the Midwest related to climate change? Does this have to do with climate change weather extremes that scientists are talking about? So the scientists that are talking about it are all of us, as well as the research community. The answer is potentially. So what we have definitely seen, and this isn't necessarily something we're predicting, we've already seen heavier rainfall events happen, and on the shorter time scale most of the time. We've also seen longer stretches of dryness. We also see higher temperatures. All these things are things that we can measure today. What the models are telling us in terms of what could happen in the future, based on how much greenhouse gases are in the air and all that, is that we could see more heavy rainfall events interspersed by longer periods of dryness. Now, is that true across the entire North Central U.S. equally? Absolutely not. It's going to be different depending on where you are. Probably drier stretches further west into the high plains and plains. And definitely with warmer temperatures, though, we're going to see more evaporation and more evapotranspiration, which means the plants and other things pulling more moisture out of the soil and making conditions drier. Okay, maybe even faster than they used to. That's an incomplete answer. I'm sorry. And if you want to talk more about that, I know you know how to get a hold of me, and we can talk about that. And then I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that. Dennis? No. Okay.
No. Go ahead, Doug. Go ahead.
Okay. Last question is: could you repeat? And this is Anna. Could you repeat what was said about barge traffic this fall and any potential load restrictions due to low Mississippi River levels later this summer and into the fall harvest season?
It's just something we have to keep an eye on for now. Currently, there are some restrictions on the main stem river. About 10 to 20% of barge loads are being restricted right now. So should the low water continue into the fall, those restrictions will continue as well. If the low water gets even lower, I'm sure those restrictions will increase. So, it all depends on what the weather does over the next couple months.
And Anna, for the lower Mississippi, the key area for us to watch is the Ohio River Basin more than the upper Miss and the Missouri. Would you say that or not? Sure.
Yes, I would. Yeah, 60% of the water in the lower Mississippi comes from the Ohio Basin, both mainly the Ohio River and the Tennessee rivers. Those are the two main contributors. But we also rely on the upper Miss too. But like this past spring, we had kind of a big flood on the upper Mississippi from all that snow melt. Near record snow amounts up there. And that led to a big flood on the upper Mississippi part north of St. Louis. But again, we didn't see much impacts south of St. Louis because the river just changes so much, and the river channel expands so much after it gets past St. Louis, where the Missouri River comes in, and expands even more below Cairo, Illinois, where the Ohio River comes in. So yes, we rely on water from the northern plains, from the upper Mississippi, from Missouri, but we really lean on the water coming from the Midwest, from Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, Kentucky, and Tennessee, to maintain the water levels on the lower Mississippi.
Yep. Well, thank you, Anna and Molly and Dennis. I think we're up. Our time is up. And thanks all of you who hung in here so long. And again, if you have any questions, you know how to contact us. We'll be back. Well, I'll be back with Trent Ford and Dennis on the 20th if you want to get an update on much of this information. So thanks all. Have a great weekend, or weekend, I guess.